Paris, France, May 14, 1985. 350,000 people gathered beneath a perfect blue sky at Le Bourget Airport, the greatest aviation showcase in the world. Cameras ready, officials watching, history about to be written in smoke and flame. Inside the cockpit of the F-20 Tigershark, Captain Jack Sterling checked his instruments one final time. 44 years old, Navy veteran, test pilot, Texas boy through and through. His hands moved with the practiced ease of a man who had logged over 4,000 hours in fighter aircraft. On his flight vest pinned just above his heart, he wore his father's combat wings from Korea, a talisman, a promise to generations past. The radio crackled. Tower clearance. Sterling advanced the throttle and felt 17,700 pounds of thrust surge through the airframe. The F-20 leaped forward like a thoroughbred released from the gate. In 8 seconds flat, the aircraft went from standing still to 180 knots. The nose lifted, the main gear left French soil, and for one perfect moment, everything David Morrison had worked for, everything Jack Sterling believed in, was proven absolutely right. The crowd roared their approval. Sterling pulled into a climb so steep it seemed to defy physics. 52,800 feet per minute, nearly vertical. The Tigershark disappeared into the sun like a missile, leaving only the thunder of its engine behind. At 15,000 feet, Sterling rolled the aircraft through 8 perfect points, the fighter responding to every input with precision that made veteran pilots weep with envy. He leveled off, checked his airspeed, keyed the radio. "This one's for Mike," he said. Then he pulled 7 Gs, the force of 7 times his body weight crushing down on him. His vision began to tunnel. 8 Gs, the gray closed in from the edges. His breathing became labored grunts transmitted over the open radio channel. On the ground, 350,000 people watched. In the VIP section, defense ministers from 6 nations lowered their champagne glasses. In the press area, cameras captured every second. And in the observation tower, David Morrison gripped the railing so hard, his knuckles turned white. "Jack," he said into his headset. "Jack, that's enough. Level off." No response. Only the sound of labored breathing, then silence. The F-20 continued its turn. Perfect, graceful, deadly. But it was descending now, nose dropping, bank angle increasing. 300 feet, 200, 100. Morrison screamed his friend's name. At 380 knots, the Tigershark impacted the ground beyond the runway. The fireball rose 200 feet into the air. Black smoke billowed skyward. 350,000 people stood in stunned silence. In the tower, David Morrison's legs gave out. He collapsed to his knees, staring at the column of smoke rising over the French countryside. Behind him, someone was crying. Someone else was on the phone shouting for emergency services. The world continued to move, to function, to process the tragedy. But for Morrison, time stopped. Because this wasn't the first time. This was the second pilot he had lost. The second man who had died believing in something Morrison had created. And in that moment, kneeling on the cold tower floor, David Morrison understood with perfect clarity that he had killed his best friend. Cut to black, title card. 18 months earlier. The story doesn't begin in Paris. It begins in California, in a factory that smelled of machine oil and honest work. It begins with a young man standing on an assembly line floor looking up at something beautiful. Hawthorne, California, summer of 1965. David Morrison was 23 years old, fresh out of Texas A&M with a degree in aerospace engineering. His first day at Northrop Corporation. The noise of the factory floor surrounded him. Riveting guns, hydraulic presses, the shouts of workers communicating over the din. But Morrison barely heard any of it. He was staring at an F-5 Tiger. The aircraft sat on the assembly line in various stages of completion. Workers swarmed around it like bees around a hive, each person knowing their role, executing with precision. The Tiger was small compared to the massive fighters Morrison had studied in textbooks. No sleek curves or intimidating bulk. Just clean lines, functional design, honest engineering. A hand clapped him on the shoulder. Morrison turned to find a man in his 50s wearing coveralls and a welcoming smile. Bill Henderson, former B-17 mechanic in the 8th Air Force during the war, 20 years at Northrop, Morrison's assigned mentor. Kid, Henderson said, his voice carrying the distinctive drawl of rural Oklahoma. "You see that bird there?" Morrison nodded. That ain't the prettiest fighter you'll ever see. Henderson lit a cigarette, took a long drag. It ain't the fastest. It sure as hell ain't the most expensive. But you know what it is? Morrison waited. It's honest. Henderson gestured with his cigarette toward the Tiger. Every pound of weight serves a purpose. Every system does exactly what it's supposed to do. No gold plating, no contractor grift, no Pentagon puzzle palaces deciding how many rivets we can charge for. He fixed Morrison with a look that seemed to see right through him. This company was built on a simple idea. We make things that work. Things that bring boys home safe. You remember that? Always. Morrison did remember. For the next 20 years, he never forgot. But to understand why those words mattered so much, to understand why David Morrison would eventually sacrifice everything for a principle, you have to understand where he came from. Lubbock, Texas, 1942. David Morrison was born 3 days after his father shipped out for England. Master Sergeant James Morrison, ball turret gunner, 8th Air Force, 23 years old, newly married, about to become a father he would never meet. David's mother kept every letter James sent home. She read them aloud to her infant son, even though he couldn't possibly understand the words. Later, when David was old enough to read, she gave him the letters. 37 in total. The last one arrived 6 weeks after the telegram. In that final letter dated February 9th, 1944, James Morrison wrote about his crew, about the B-17 they flew, about how the ball turret kept jamming, how the hydraulics leaked, how they'd filed 3 separate maintenance reports, but nothing ever got fixed because there were never enough parts, never enough time, and always another mission. We do our jobs, James wrote. We fly what they give us. But sometimes I wonder if the folks building these birds know that every rivet that fails, every system that breaks, that's somebody's life. That's somebody's boy not coming home. 3 days later over Munich, the ball turret jammed during an attack run. James Morrison couldn't rotate his guns to track the FW-190 closing from below. The German pilot put a 20-millimeter cannon shell through the turret, through James Morrison, through the fuselage. The B-17 made it back to England. 7 of the 10 crew survived. James Morrison's body came home in March. His son was 14 months old. David Morrison grew up in the shadow of that loss, raised by his mother and grandfather in a small house on the edge of Lubbock. His grandfather, William Morrison, had served in France during the First World War. Artillery, Somme, Argonne. He didn't talk about it much, but on certain nights, usually after a few whiskeys, the stories would come. About mud and wire and the thunder of guns. About boys from Texas and Oklahoma and Kansas far from home doing what their country asked, because that's what men did. About promises made and promises broken. About how the politicians always sent boys to die, but never seemed to care enough to give them proper equipment. Your daddy William told young David one night, died because somebody somewhere decided saving a few dollars on parts was more important than saving lives. Don't you ever forget that. When you grow up, if you ever build things, you build them right. You owe that to the boys who don't come home. David Morrison never forgot. At Texas A&M, he studied aerospace engineering with a focus that bordered on obsession, while other students went to football games and fraternity parties. Morrison spent weekends in the library studying stress analysis and aerodynamics. His professors noticed. They wrote recommendation letters. And when Northrop Corporation came recruiting in the spring of '65, David Morrison was at the top of their list. So when Bill Henderson told him about honest engineering, about building things that brought boys home, Morrison didn't hear it as company philosophy. He heard it as a continuation of his father's legacy, a chance to do what James Morrison never got the chance to do himself. For 7 years, Morrison learned his craft. He started in quality control, checking welds and riveted patterns, moved to design, working on subsystems, earned his way up through talent and tireless work. By 1972, at age 30, he was leading the engineering team for the F-5E Tiger II program. The Tiger II was an evolution of the original F-5, better radar, more powerful engines, advanced weapon systems. But the core philosophy remained unchanged. Small, light, affordable, reliable, everything the Pentagon wasn't building. Morrison married Jennifer Hayes in '68, a farm girl from Waco studying teaching at UCLA. She found him in the university library one Saturday evening, surrounded by textbooks, so focused on his work, he didn't notice the building had closed around him. She knocked on his table, smiled, asked if he knew they were locking up. Morrison looked up, saw her, and in that moment forgot everything he'd been studying. Their daughter Emily was born in 1970. Morrison held her in the hospital, this tiny person who depended on him completely, and made a silent promise that he would make the world safer for her, that he would do work that mattered. On Emily's second birthday, the F-5E Tiger II made its first flight. Morrison stood on the tarmac at Edwards Air Force Base watching the aircraft climb into the desert sky. Jennifer beside him holding Emily on her hip. The 2-year-old pointed at the silver shape growing smaller against the blue. "Daddy's plane," Jennifer said. "Pretty," Emily replied. "It was pretty, but more than that, it was right. Every system tested and retested, every component built to last. This wasn't a fighter designed by committee, bloated with features to satisfy competing congressional districts. This was a fighter designed by engineers who cared about the pilots who would fly it." Over the next 4 years, 1,417 F-5E Tiger IIs were built. They served with air forces around the world: Greece, Turkey, Iran, Taiwan, South Korea, Switzerland, Brazil. Pilots loved them. Maintenance crews loved them. And most importantly, they worked. In those years, Morrison rose to chief engineer. His team grew to over 100 people. Many of them were like Bill Henderson veterans or sons of veterans men who understood that what they built wasn't just machinery. It was a promise, a commitment, a sacred trust with the pilots who would stake their lives on their work. Morrison believed with every fiber of his being that if you did good work, if you built something excellent, success would follow. That merit mattered. That integrity won. He was about to learn how wrong he was. Taiwan Republic of China, 1975. Across the Taiwan Strait, the People's Republic of China was modernizing its air force. Soviet-built MiG-21s, modern radar, beyond visual range missiles. The Taiwanese Air Force, still flying F-5As and early F-5Es, found themselves increasingly outmatched. Colonel Robert Chen sat in a briefing room in Taipei reviewing intelligence reports on Chinese capabilities. 45 years old, career fighter pilot. His father had flown P-40 Warhawks with General Chennault's Flying Tigers during World War II, defending China against Japanese invasion. Robert had been born in California, raised in both cultures, chose to serve the Republic of China when the communists took the mainland. Now looking at the reports, Chen understood they needed better aircraft. The question was what and from where. The Americans had options: F-4 Phantom, powerful, capable, but old, complex, expensive to maintain; F-15 Eagle, the best air superiority fighter in the world. But State Department would never approve the sale. Too advanced, too politically sensitive, given ongoing diplomatic overtures to Beijing. That left the F-5 family. Proven, reliable, already in Taiwanese service. But lacking the one capability Chen knew his pilots desperately needed: beyond visual range engagement. The ability to fire radar-guided missiles at enemy aircraft before they got close enough for a dogfight. Chen requested a meeting with Northrop representatives. If anyone could solve this problem, it would be the company that had built 3 generations of Tigers. The meeting took place at Northrop headquarters in Hawthorne. Chen arrived with his technical staff. They were shown to a comfy conference room where Sarah Blackwood, Vice President of International Sales, waited with her team. And standing in the corner, looking slightly uncomfortable in a suit instead of his usual work coveralls, was David Morrison. Blackwood made the introductions. Chen's staff laid out their requirements: bigger radar, Sparrow missile capability, extended range, all packaged in an airframe that Taiwanese maintenance crews already knew how to service. "Can it be done?" Chen asked. Morrison had been quiet throughout the presentation, just listening. Now he stood, walked to the whiteboard, and began sketching. Larger nose cone for the radar, strengthened wing hardpoints for Sparrow launch rails, modified avionics bay, enhanced electrical systems. His marker moved quickly, confidently. The design took shape in real time, emerging from pure engineering, intuition, honed by 15 years of building fighters. When he finished, Morrison turned to Chen. "Yes," he said, "it can be done. 6 months for preliminary design, 12 months for first prototype. Call it the F-5G. Chen studied the whiteboard. In his mind, he was already flying the aircraft Morrison had sketched. Banking hard over the strait. Radar lock on a MiG. Sparrow away. his pilots would finally have a fighting chance. How many aircraft would you need, Morrison asked. Chen did quick math. 300, maybe more. A multi-year production run, billions of dollars, thousands of American jobs. A partnership between nations that shared common cause. The two men shook hands across the table. Morrison's grip was firm, honest. We'll build you the best fighter we can, Morrison said. Chen believed him. 6 months later, preliminary design was complete. The F-5G looked promising on paper. Better than promising, it looked revolutionary for its class. Morrison's team had delivered exactly what they promised. A significant upgrade that maintained the Tiger philosophy of simplicity and reliability while adding modern capability. Northrop executives began planning for full development. Suppliers were contacted. Production facilities prepared. This would be the next chapter in the Tiger story. F-5A, F-5E, F-20, each generation better than the last, each generation proving that honest engineering won. Then in January of 1977, Jimmy Carter was inaugurated as President of the United States. Carter ran on a platform of human rights and arms control. He believed genuinely and deeply that America's role in the world should be to reduce violence, not arm it. During the campaign, he promised to restrict weapons sales to foreign nations, to lead by example, to show that peace was possible if someone had the courage to choose it first. On March 15, 1977, President Carter announced a comprehensive ban on the export of advanced fighter aircraft. F-15, banned. F-16, banned. F-4, banned. The ban covered every modern American fighter, every platform that could give a purchasing nation significant military advantage. The goal was noble: reduce the arms race, prevent regional conflicts from spiraling into larger wars, show the world that America valued peace over profit. But there was one aircraft the ban did not explicitly cover: the F-5. Because it wasn't considered advanced, it was the budget option. The trainer, the aircraft you gave to allies who couldn't afford or didn't need cutting-edge capability. David Morrison was at his daughter's 7th birthday party when he got the call. It was a Sunday afternoon, March sunshine, backyard barbecue at their house in Palmdale, burgers on the grill, neighbors, engineering buddies from work, kids playing in the yard, Emily running around in a party dress, laughing with friends. Jack Sterling was there. Morrison had met him a year earlier when the Navy hired Sterling as a consultant test pilot. 35 years old, Top Gun instructor, combat veteran from Vietnam, and like Morrison, a Texas boy. They'd bonded immediately over shared roots and shared values. Sterling's wife, Sarah, was in the kitchen with Jennifer helping with the cake. Pure Americana, the kind of afternoon that makes you grateful to be alive. The phone rang inside the house. Jennifer answered, called out to Morrison. It was Sarah Blackwood from work. Morrison excused himself from the grill, went inside. The news was already on television. Carter at a podium, announcing the export ban. Sarah, what does this mean for us? Morrison asked. Blackwood's voice carried a smile through the phone. David, it means we just became the only game in town. F-5 isn't on the banned list. Every country that needs fighters and can't get F-16s or F-15s, they're calling us, all of them. Morrison felt something lift in his chest. Carter's peace initiative had inadvertently created a monopoly. Northrop's F-5 program would boom. The F-5G development for Taiwan could proceed without competition. Everything Morrison had worked toward, everything he'd promised Colonel Chen, was suddenly guaranteed. He went back outside. Sterling saw his expression, raised an eyebrow in question. Morrison grinned, poured himself a beer, raised the bottle in toast. To Jimmy Carter, he said, the man who just made us rich. Everyone laughed. They drank. They celebrated. The burgers burned a little, but nobody cared. It was a perfect day, a perfect moment. Morrison would remember it later as the last time he felt genuinely hopeful about the future. Because what none of them understood yet, what David Morrison and his engineers' optimism couldn't see, was that they'd just walked into a trap. That Carter's ban wasn't an opportunity. It was a cage. And the key to that cage was held by people who didn't care about honest engineering, who didn't care about promises made or pilots saved. People who played by different rules. Washington rules. Within 9 months, everything Morrison believed about merit and integrity would be tested. Within 2 years, it would be shattered. And within 8 years, two good men would be dead killed, not by enemy fire, but by the very system they'd served. But on that Sunday afternoon in March of '77, standing in his backyard with his family and friends watching his daughter blow out candles on her birthday cake, David Morrison didn't know any of that yet. He just knew he'd been given a chance to prove his father's death meant something. A chance to build aircraft so good they'd bring every pilot home safe. A chance to honor the promise he'd made to a grandfather's ghost and a father he'd never met. He had no idea how much that promise would cost. The trap closed slowly. So slowly that David Morrison didn't feel it tightening until it was already too late. Fall of 1977. Morrison's team worked 16-hour days on the F-5G design. Colonel Chen visited twice each time, more impressed with the progress. The aircraft was taking shape not just on paper, but in wind tunnel models, in computer simulations, in the careful calculations that turned Morrison's napkin sketch into something that could actually fly. Taiwan wasn't the only interested party. South Korea inquired. Pakistan sent observers. Even some NATO countries, frustrated by the complexity and cost of American frontline fighters, started asking questions. The F-5G promised to be everything the export market wanted, capable without being threatening, modern without being unaffordable. By Christmas, Morrison's design was nearly complete. He brought Emily to the hangar on Christmas Eve, just the two of them, 7 years old now. Old enough to understand that Daddy built airplanes, young enough to think that was the coolest job in the world. The mock-up sat in the center of the hangar, full scale, unpainted aluminum, scaffolding around it where workers had been making final adjustments before the holiday break. Emily walked around it slowly, eyes wide. "It's so big," she said. Morrison knelt beside her, not as big as some, but big enough to keep pilots safe. Like Grandpa Morrison felt the familiar ache. "Yeah, sweetheart, like Grandpa." Emily reached out, touched the cold metal. "When will it fly?" "Soon. Maybe next year. We're almost ready. And then the mean countries won't hurt people." Morrison smiled at her child's simplification of geopolitics. "Then our friends will be safer. That's what matters." They stood there together in the empty hangar, father and daughter, surrounded by the promise of what was to come. Outside, snow was starting to fall. Rare for California, the whole day felt touched by magic, by possibility. Morrison took a photo, Emily standing beneath the F-5G, both hands on the fuselage, grinning up at the camera. He would keep that photo on his desk for the next 8 years. Long after everything else fell apart, he would keep that photo. Proof that once briefly everything had seemed possible. January 18th, 1978, late Friday afternoon. Morrison was reviewing stress calculations when his phone rang. He almost didn't answer. Jennifer had planned a rare weekend away, just the two of them. Emily was staying with grandparents. They were supposed to leave in an hour, but the caller ID showed Colonel Chen's number. Washington, D.C. area code. Morrison picked up. "Robert," he said, "good to hear from you. We're ahead of schedule on the inlet design. I think you'll be pleased with the David." Chen's voice was flat, dead. "Stop." Morrison stopped. "What's wrong?" There was a long silence on the line. Morrison could hear background noise. An airport, maybe. Announcement speakers, the hum of crowds. President Carter personally blocked the sale. Morrison's brain refused to process the words for several seconds. They sat there incomprehensible, like a sentence in a foreign language. "What State Department?" Chen's voice was carefully controlled, but Morrison could hear the anger underneath. "They informed my government this morning. F-5G is classified as an advanced weapon system. Sale to Taiwan would, quote, destabilize regional dynamics and complicate normalization efforts with Beijing." "That's insane." Morrison stood, papers scattering from his desk. "We're not even talking about F-15s or F-16s. This is an F-5. It's the budget option. That's the whole point. I know what it is, David. I've spent 6 months working with you on it. But Carter's ban specifically didn't cover F-5 variants. We checked. Legal reviewed everything. Apparently Carter has broader authority than we thought." Chen paused. "Or perhaps the rules change when it's convenient." Morrison sank into his chair. 6 months of work, hundreds of engineering hours, millions in development costs already spent. And beyond that, beyond the money and time, there was the promise he'd made. The handshake. The commitment between two men who believed their word meant something. Robert, I'm sorry. We'll figure something out. We'll redesign. We'll find a way to David. Chen cut him off gently. My father flew obsolete P-40 Warhawks against Japanese Zeros. Outmatched. Outgunned. Many of his squadron didn't survive. Now his son will fly obsolete F-5Es against modern Chinese MiGs. Because Washington plays games, that's not fair to you. No. Chen's voice hardened slightly. But fairness stopped mattering to great powers a long time ago, didn't it? They spoke for a few more minutes. Professional courtesies. Promises to stay in touch. Both men knowing those promises were empty. When Morrison hung up, he sat staring at the phone for a long time. Jennifer found him there an hour later. Suitcase packed, ready for their weekend. David. You okay, Morrison told her. Watched understanding, then sympathy cross her face. I'm sorry, she said. I know how hard you worked. It's not about the work. Morrison's voice came out rougher than he intended. I gave him my word, Jen. We shook hands. And now I have to call him back and say my government lied. That's not your fault. Whose fault is it? Then Morrison stood, began pacing. We did everything right. We followed every regulation. We built exactly what they asked for. And some bureaucrat in Washington decides none of that matters. Jennifer watched him. She'd seen her husband frustrated before, stressed by deadlines, worried about technical problems. But this was different. This was something breaking. Maybe she said carefully, maybe this is a sign. Maybe it's time to step back. You've been working so hard. Emily barely sees you. I barely see you. This isn't about work hours, Jen. Then what is it about? Morrison stopped pacing, looked at his wife, tried to find words for the thing collapsing inside him. The belief system crumbling. My dad died in a plane that wasn't good enough because someone somewhere decided cutting corners was acceptable. I've spent 15 years trying to build things so good nobody could ignore them, trying to prove that doing right matters. And now I'm learning it doesn't, that politics beats merit every time. Jennifer crossed the room, took his hands. David, you're a good man. You build good things. One setback doesn't change that. Morrison wanted to believe her, but standing there in his office holding his wife's hands, all he could think about was his grandfather's warning. About how politicians sent boys to die but never cared enough to give them proper equipment. About how the system always failed the honest men. He'd thought his generation would be different. That America in 1978 was different from America in 1918 or 1944. That merit and integrity had finally won. He was wrong. They didn't go away that weekend. Morrison called and canceled. Spent Saturday at the office writing memos to senior management. Spent Sunday drinking beer with Billy Henderson at a VFW bar in Palmdale, surrounded by old veterans who understood betrayal as a fundamental fact of life. Henderson didn't offer platitudes. Just sat there drinking in companionable silence, occasionally nodding when Morrison spoke. Around them, other vets told stories. Korea, Vietnam, every war the same story. Politicians making promises, boys paying the price. Morrison went home late Sunday night. Found Jennifer asleep on the couch TV, playing to an empty room. Emily's drawings scattered on the coffee table. Stick figures of airplanes and families. He picked up one drawing. Daddy's special plane written in 7-year-old handwriting. A crayon F-5G with wings too big and a smile on the nose. Morrison folded the drawing carefully, put it in his wallet. He would carry it for the next 8 years, through everything that was coming. Through all the losses and betrayals. A reminder of what he'd been trying to build and why 1978 became 1979. Morrison threw himself into other projects. Northrop was bidding on Navy contracts, working with McDonnell Douglas on what would become the F-18 Hornet. There was plenty of work, plenty of ways to stay busy and avoid thinking about broken promises. But he couldn't stop thinking about the F-5G. The design sat in his office gathering dust, perfect on paper. Dead in reality. Then in March of '79, the Carter administration announced something new. The FX program, fighter export, a competition to develop a less capable export fighter that America could sell to allies without triggering concerns about technology transfer or regional destabilization. The catch, manufacturers would fund development themselves. No government money, no shared risk, Build it on your own dime, and maybe if the stars aligned and politics cooperated, you might sell them. Morrison read the announcement 3 times, looked at the requirements, looked at his F-5G design. They were asking for exactly what he'd already built. He walked down to the shop floor, found Henderson supervising a hydraulics installation on an F-5E. Bill Morrison said, "You got a minute?" Henderson climbed down from the work stand, wiping grease from his hands. "What's on your mind, kid?" Morrison showed him the FX announcement. Henderson read slowly, lips moving slightly. When he finished, he looked at Morrison over the top of the paper. "You want to resurrect 5G? It's perfect for this. We're 90% done with design. We could have a prototype flying in 2 years." Henderson handed back the paper. "Self-funded means company money. A lot of money. Board's not going to approve that without serious consideration." "I know. And even if they do," Henderson continued, "what makes you think the government won't screw you again? They killed Taiwan's sale. What's different now," Morrison had thought about this. "Rehearse the argument. This time it's an official competition. This time there's a program of record. This time we're not dependent on one customer or one political decision." Henderson studied him. "Kid, you sound like you're trying to convince yourself. Maybe I am." Morrison met the older man's eyes. "But what's the alternative? Walk away, admit they win. Who's they? The people who think merit doesn't matter. The people who think politics beats engineering." Morrison's voice rose slightly. "My father died because someone somewhere decided good enough was acceptable. I will not spend my career accepting good enough." Henderson was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll back you with the board, but David, you gotta understand something. Your daddy died fighting Nazis. That's a clear enemy, a just cause. This is fighting your own government. That's different. That's harder. And most times that's impossible." Morrison heard the warning, ignored it. Within a month, he was standing in Northrop's boardroom, presenting to 9 executives, most of them old enough to have served in World War II, men who understood duty and sacrifice, men who Morrison hoped would understand why this mattered. The technical case was solid. F-5G would dominate the FX competition. General Dynamics was entering the F-1679, a downgraded version of the F-16. But the F-5G was purpose-built, lighter, simpler, cheaper, better. The business case was harder. $200 million, maybe more. All company money, all at risk. Morrison showed slide after slide, performance projections, market analysis, return on investment calculations. The board listened politely, asked good questions, remained skeptical. Finally, Thomas Aldridge, the CEO, held up a hand. "Enough numbers, David. Tell me why we should do this." Morrison looked at the old admiral. 68 years old, fought in the Pacific, commanded a destroyer at Leyte Gulf, a man who understood what was at stake when you sent boys into harm's way. "Sir Morrison began. My father died over Munich in February of '44. Ball turret gunner. The turret jammed because maintenance couldn't get parts. He couldn't rotate his guns. German fighter killed him. The room was very quiet. I became an engineer." Morrison continued, "Because I wanted to build planes so good they'd bring every pilot home. I thought if we just did excellent work, if we built with integrity, success would follow. The F-5G is excellent work. It's what American engineering should be. And if we don't build it, we're saying none of that matters. We're saying politicians and bureaucrats get to decide what's good enough." One of the board members, a former Army colonel, spoke up. "Son, that's a passionate speech, but passion doesn't pay back $200 million. "No, sir," Morrison acknowledged. "Sales do, and we will sell this aircraft because it's better than anything else in its class, because pilots will love it, because it's right." Bill Henderson stood then, the old mechanic in his work coveralls surrounded by men in suits. "Permission to speak?" Admiral Aldridge nodded. "I served under you at Leyte, sir." Henderson's Oklahoma drawl filled the room. "I've worked at this company 32 years, built everything from Black Widows to Tigers. And I'm telling you, F-5G is the best bird I'll ever help build. You want financial analysis? Hell, I can't give you that. But I can tell you this. Every boy who flies this airplane, every pilot we keep safe, that's worth something. Maybe not on a balance sheet, but worth something." The board voted 5-4 in favor. Morrison walked out of that meeting feeling like he'd won something important, like he'd proven that integrity still mattered, that good men could still make a difference. He had no idea he'd just committed to 8 years of heartbreak. F-5G development began immediately, but the program needed a new designation, something that showed this wasn't just another F-5 variant. This was different, revolutionary. The Air Force assigned a new number, F-20, and Morrison's team, in a moment of optimism that would later seem almost tragic, gave it a name, Tigershark, a synthesis of the tiger lineage and something new, something dangerous, something that could hunt. 1980 through 1982, the development years. Morrison assembled a team, 50 engineers, 200 technicians. Many of them, like Henderson, were veterans or sons of veterans. Men who understood they weren't just building machinery, they were building a promise. The work was brutal, long nights, 7-day weeks, technical challenges that seemed insurmountable until they weren't. But slowly and possibly, the Tigershark took shape. They threw out the twin engines of the F-5, installed a single General Electric F-404, the same engine that powered the F-18 Hornet, 17,700 pounds of thrust, 60% more than the combined output of the F-5E's engines. They installed the APG-67 radar, multi-mode, track while scan, the ability to find and engage enemy fighters at 75 kilometers, a quantum leap over the simple ranging radar in previous Tigers. They added fly-by-wire controls, made the aircraft inherently unstable, which meant it was also incredibly agile, maneuverability that matched the F-16 in computer simulations. Better in some regimes, the F-20 emerged as something remarkable, something that proved Morrison's thesis, that if you focused on the mission, ignored the politics, built with integrity and skill, you could create something truly exceptional. But while Morrison's team worked, the world was changing around them. November 1980, Ronald Reagan won the presidency in a landslide. Carter's vision of peace through restraint was rejected. Reagan promised peace through strength, and strength meant weapons, lots of them. Within months of taking office, the Reagan administration began systematically dismantling Carter's export controls. F-16 sales to Taiwan, approved. F-15 sales to Saudi Arabia, approved. F-18 sales to multiple countries, approved. The FX program, designed to provide alternatives when frontline fighters were banned, suddenly had no purpose, because nothing was banned anymore. Sarah Blackwood called Morrison into her office in April of '81. He arrived to find her staring out the window, shoulders tense. "We have a problem," she said without turning around. "Technical, political." Blackwood turned to face him. "Reagan's opening up F-16 exports. State Department is approving case-by-case sales." Morrison processed this. "So our competition isn't just the F-16-79 anymore. Our competition is the actual F-16. Full capability, combat-proven, flying with the Air Force." She sat heavily. "David, nobody wants to buy the second-best fighter from America. They want what the Americans fly. We're not second best." Morrison heard the defensiveness in his own voice. "On paper, F-20 matches F-16 in most categories, beats it in some. On paper doesn't matter. What matters is perception. And the perception is, if the F-20 was really that good, why doesn't the U.S. military fly it? Because it wasn't designed for the U.S. military. It was designed for FX, for export. I know that, you know that. But customers don't care about design philosophy. They care about prestige, about having American equipment, about not being seen as settling for less." "So what are you saying?" Blackwood looked at him steadily. "I'm saying we're in trouble. I'm saying every country we brief, every demo we do, we get the same response. Impressed but not interested. Interested but not buying. Waiting to see if they can get F-16 approval instead." Morrison felt something cold settle in his stomach. "We've spent 3 years. We're 8 months from first flight. I know, we've invested everything. I know, David." Blackwood's voice was gentle. "And I'm not saying give up. I'm saying be realistic about what we're facing." Morrison left her office and walked the factory floor. Watched his team working. Henderson supervising wing assembly. Young engineers running tests. Technicians fitting avionics. All of them believing. All of them committed. He couldn't tell them their work might be for nothing. that politics had changed the game while they were busy building something excellent. So he didn't. He just went back to work. Because what else could he do? The F-20 made its first flight on August 30th, 1982. Edwards Air Force Base. Dawn light turning the desert gold. Morrison stood on the tarmac, Jennifer beside him. Emily, now 12 and looking embarrassed to be at her dad's work event, but secretly proud. Jack Sterling would fly the first mission. He'd been with the program from the start, consulting on design planning, test protocols. Now he would be the first human to trust their work with his life. Sterling walked to the aircraft in his flight suit, stopped, turned back to Morrison. They'd been up all night doing final checks. Both men exhausted, both men running on adrenaline and belief. "It's going to be perfect," Sterling said. "You sure?" Sterling grinned. "I'm betting my life on it." That's sure enough. They embraced quickly. Morrison stepped back, watched his friend climb into the cockpit, watched the canopy close, watched the F-404 engine spool up with that distinctive whine. Jennifer took Morrison's hand, squeezed. The Tigershark rolled, built speed. At 180 knots, Sterling rotated. The nose lifted. Main gear left runway. For the first time in history, an F-20 Tigershark flew. Morrison felt tears on his face, didn't wipe them away. In his ear, Sterling's voice over the radio. "Edwards Tower, Tigershark 1, gear up. Climbing through 5,000. Dave, this bird is incredible." The test flight lasted 45 minutes. Sterling put the aircraft through basic maneuvers, verified handling characteristics, checked systems. Everything worked. Everything worked perfectly. When he landed, when the canopy opened and Sterling stood in the cockpit giving double thumbs up, the team erupted, cheering, crying, embracing. This was the moment. This was the validation. 3 years of work, $200 million, countless hours of doubt and difficulty. Worth it. All worth it. The celebration that night was pure joy. Not a corporate event, but a family gathering. Engineers brought their kids. Veterans told stories. Someone brought a guitar. Texas country music under California stars. Morrison held Emily on his shoulders while she laughed at something Jack Sterling was saying. Jennifer stood close, smiling happy in a way Morrison hadn't seen in years. This was what success felt like. This was what happened when you believed in something and refused to quit. Standing there surrounded by his team and his family, Morrison let himself believe they'd won. That the hard part was over. That now F-20 would prove itself and customers would come. He didn't know yet about the ambush waiting. Didn't know about congressional hearings and foreign competitors getting American money. Didn't know about G-forces and failed engagements and funerals for good men. Standing there, he believed the story ended here. With triumph. He was wrong. The story was only beginning, and the worst was still ahead. Success, it turned out, was the easy part. What came after was harder. Fall of 1982. The F-20 had flown. The data was perfect. Performance exceeded predictions. Sterling filed reports that read like love letters to engineering excellence. Lighter than F-16, better thrust to weight, climb rate that made other fighters look anchored to the ground. Northrop began the demonstration tour. Europe first, Farnborough Air Show in England. Sterling flew aggressive profiles that left crowds cheering and competitors nervous. Defense ministers watched, took notes, expressed interest. But interest was not orders. South Korea, very interested. Would like to see more demonstrations. Pakistan, extremely impressed. Need time to evaluate budget. Thailand, exceptional aircraft. Must consult with government. The pattern became clear. Everyone loved the F-20. Nobody would commit to buying it. Morrison attended a briefing in Seoul in December of '82. Korean Air Force generals, all veteran pilots, all thoroughly briefed on the Tigershark's capabilities. The technical presentation went perfectly. Questions about performance, questions about maintenance, questions about training, all answered to complete satisfaction. Then the final question, from a 3-star general who'd flown F-5s in combat. This aircraft, it is not flown by United States Air Force. Morrison glanced at Sarah Blackwood. She nodded for him to answer. No, sir, the F-20 was designed specifically for the export market, for allied nations. The general smiled politely. I see. And if it is so superior to F-16, why does America not fly it themselves? Morrison began his prepared answer. Different mission requirements, different procurement timelines. The F-20 offers 90% of F-16 capability at 60% of cost, which makes it ideal for General Blackwood. Interrupted smoothly. What would make the F-20 acceptable to the Republic of Korea? The general considered this. If United States Air Force adopted aircraft for Air National Guard, or a very large nation major American ally placed significant order, then we would feel confident. In other words, Morrison understood with sinking clarity they wanted someone else to go first. Nobody wanted to be the country flying America's second-tier fighter. The budget option, the export model, they wanted what America flew, or nothing. The meeting ended cordially, promises to stay in touch. Everyone knowing those promises meant nothing. On the flight home, Morrison stared out the window at clouds over the Pacific. We built the better aircraft, he said to no one in particular. Blackwood, sitting across the aisle, looked up from her notes. David, better doesn't matter. You know that now. It should matter. Should, yes. Does know. Morrison was quiet for a long time. Then what do? We keep trying. We find the country willing to break the pattern, or we find an American buyer. The Air Force won't buy it. Then we try Air Guard, Navy aggressor squadrons. Someone. Morrison closed his eyes, tried to sleep, couldn't, kept seeing that Korean general's polite smile. The smile that said, we know what you're really selling, and we're not interested. They arrived home 3 days before Christmas. Morrison spent the holiday with Jennifer and Emily, trying to be present, trying to forget the slow-motion disaster unfolding. But even opening presents, even watching Emily's delight at her new bicycle, part of his mind was calculating. Running numbers, trying to figure out how to save a program that the world had decided it didn't want. Spring of 1983 brought the next blow. Morrison was called to testify before a House Armed Services Subcommittee, oversight hearing on the FX program. He prepared carefully, brought charts, performance data, cost comparisons, everything to show that F-20 represented excellent value for American defense dollars and allied capability. The hearing room was cold, fluorescent lights, congressional staffers typing, cameras recording for C-SPAN. Morrison took his seat at the witness table, adjusted the microphone. The questions started technical, specifications, testing results, timeline. Morrison answered confidently. This was his ground. This was what he knew. Then Congressman Bernard Walsh from Massachusetts asked a different question. Mr. Morrison, are you aware of House Resolution 2378? Morrison blinked. No, sir. What does it concern? The congressman shuffled papers. It concerns $2.5 billion in loan guarantees and technology transfer to the government of Israel for development of the Lavi fighter aircraft. Morrison felt the room tilt slightly. I'm sorry, what the Lavi is a multi-role fighter, similar class to your F-20. It will use American F-16 and F-18 technology, funded by American taxpayer dollars. Walsh looked at Morrison over his reading glasses. Does that strike you as odd, given that you were required to self-fund your entire development program? Morrison's prepared testimony evaporated. His carefully measured responses disappeared. Something inside him that had been bending for years finally snapped. Yes, sir, he said, his voice rising. It strikes me as insane. Mr. Morrison, the chairman warned. Morrison stood without meaning to. My company spent over $1 billion of private money developing the F-20 because the government asked us to. We took all the risk. And while we're doing that, you're giving billions to foreign governments to build competing aircraft. The chairman banged his gavel. Mr. Morrison, you are out of order. No, sir. This entire system is out of order. He was escorted from the hearing room by security, gently but firmly. The cameras captured everything. That night, clips played on evening news. Northrop executive attacks Congress. Defense contractor blames government for failures. Some editorials supported him, most didn't. Thomas Aldrich called Morrison into his office the next morning. David, the CEO's voice was tired. What the hell were you thinking? I was thinking someone needed to tell the truth. The truth. Aldrich walked to his window overlooking the factory floor. The truth is, you just made us look bad. You made me look bad. You made this company Look like we can't handle setbacks professionally. It's not a setback, sir. It's a betrayal. It's business. Aldridge turned back. And you've been in this industry long enough to know how business works. Politics, relationships, compromise. You don't burn bridges in congressional hearings. Maybe we should burn some bridges, Morrison heard himself saying things he'd only thought before. Maybe we should stop pretending the game is fair. Stop pretending merit matters. Does this help F-20 sales? Morrison had no answer, didn't think so. Aldridge returned to his desk. Take a week off, clear your head. Come back when you're ready to be professional again. Morrison left, drove home at 10 in the morning. Found Jennifer in the garden planting tomatoes. She looked up at his car in the driveway, confusion crossing her face. You're home early. I got sent home, Morrison explained. Watched her expression shift from confusion to concern to something harder. She stood brushing dirt from her knees. David, you have to stop. Stop what? This, all of this, the obsession, the anger, it's eating you alive. They betrayed us, Jen. No, Jennifer's voice was sharp. They're doing what governments do, what they've always done. You're the one who thought it would be different. You're the one who built castles on sand. That's not fair. Fair? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want to talk about fair? Emily made honor roll. Did you notice she made varsity volleyball? Did you go to a single game I asked you to marriage counseling 3 months ago? Did you go? Morrison felt the ground shifting. I've been busy. The program is dying, and you're choosing to die with it instead of choosing your family. I'm doing this for our family, to build something that matters, to honor. Don't, Jennifer held up a hand. Don't you dare say you're doing this for your father. Your father died 40 years ago. Emily is alive right now. I am alive right now, and we need you. I can't just quit. Why not? Because, Morrison struggled to find words. Because if I quit, then they win. Then it all meant nothing. Mike and Jack risking their lives. 3 years of work. $1 billion. All for nothing. Jennifer looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up her gardening tools. Emily and I are going to my sister's for Thanksgiving. Maybe Christmas too. We'll see. Jen, I love you, David, but I can't watch you destroy yourself anymore. When you decide what actually matters to you, call me. She walked into the house. Morrison stood in the garden surrounded by half-planted tomato seedlings and felt the last stable thing in his life crack apart. That night, Jack Sterling found him at a VFW bar in Palmdale. Morrison was 3 whiskeys in, staring at the TV without seeing it. Sterling slid onto the next stool, ordered a beer. They sat in silence for several minutes. Sarah told me about Jennifer, Sterling finally said. Morrison nodded, didn't trust himself to speak. Dave, this program, it's killing you. It already killed Mike Torres. Morrison's voice was rough. Might as well finish the job. Mike made his choice. I pushed him into it. Bullshit. Sterling turned to face him. Mike was a grown man, a professional. He knew the risks. He was 32 years old, Jack. Had his whole life ahead of him. Yeah, Sterling's voice softened. And he chose to spend part of it doing something he believed in. Don't take that from him by making it about your guilt. They drank. Around them, old veterans told old stories. Vietnam, Korea, the same themes. Politicians promising, soldiers paying, nothing ever changing. What do we do now? Morrison asked. We keep going. Sterling finished his beer. We prove F-20 works. We find buyers. We honor Mike by finishing what we started. Nobody wants to buy it. Somebody will. We just have to keep showing them. Morrison wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that persistence mattered, that eventually merit would win. But Mike Torres had believed that too, and Mike Torres was dead. October 10th, 1984. Suwon Air Base, Republic of Korea. One more demonstration, one more chance. South Korea was considering a major fighter purchase, enough to save the F-20 program. Morrison flew to Korea with the team. Sterling would lead the demonstration. A new pilot had joined them, Lieutenant Michael Torres, 32, former Navy, eager, talented, hungry to prove the Tigershark to a skeptical world. The morning was perfect. Clear skies, Korean generals and defense ministers in attendance. Sterling took off first, flew a textbook demonstration. Korean officials nodded approvingly. Then Torres's turn. He started strong. Clean takeoff. Smooth maneuvers. Then the radio crackled. Tower Tigershark 2, requesting approval for one additional low-level pass. Morrison keyed his mic. Negative, Mike. Stick to the profile. Just one pass, boss. Mike returned to base. That's an order. There was a pause. Copy. One more maneuver first. Torres pulled into a hard turn. 6 Gs. 7. 7.5. Mike level off. Torres's breathing labored over the radio. Then silence. The Tigershark continued its turn. Descending. Nose dropping. Morrison dropped the binoculars. Started running. The F-20 hit the ground at 450 knots. The sound reached Morrison 5 seconds later. Thunder without rain. He collapsed to his knees, stared at the black smoke rising. Sterling reached him, pulled him up, held him while Morrison shook. "It wasn't your fault," Sterling said. But it was. Morrison knew it was. The Korean government canceled all F-20 discussions that afternoon. Mike Torres was buried in Arlington National Cemetery 3 weeks later. His fiancée Rebecca stood at the graveside. Morrison tried to approach her. She looked at him once, turned away. He didn't blame her. The investigation concluded 3 months later. G-induced loss of consciousness. GLOC, not aircraft failure. Human limitation. The distinction didn't matter to Morrison. The distinction didn't bring Mike back. January of 1985. Morrison and Jennifer's separation became official. Not divorced yet, just living apart. Emily staying with Jennifer. Morrison visiting on weekends. Awkward meals. Strained conversation. His daughter looking at him like she didn't quite recognize who he'd become. The F-20 program continued on momentum more than purpose. One more air show. One more demonstration. Paris in May. One last chance. Jack Sterling volunteered to fly it. They argued about it. Morrison's office. Late at night, bottle of bourbon between them. "You don't have to do this," Morrison said. "Yeah, I do." Sterling poured another drink. "Mike died for this bird. We owe him. We don't owe him more dead pilots. We owe him the truth. That F-20 is a great aircraft. That what happened in Korea wasn't its fault." Sterling met Morrison's eyes. "And the only way to prove that is to fly it. Show the world it's safe when flown right." "Jack." Morrison's voice broke. "I can't lose you too." "You won't." Sterling smiled. "I know the limits. I know what Mike did wrong. I'll fly it safe and I'll fly it perfect. And maybe, just maybe, someone will believe again." So Morrison agreed, because what else could he do? Sterling was right. They owed Mike. They owed the aircraft. They owed the 3 years and $1 billion and the belief that had carried them this far. They owed something to the idea that merit should matter, even if it didn't. The final weeks before Paris, Sterling trained obsessively. Morrison monitored every flight. They modified the demonstration profile, reduced maximum G loads, increased altitude buffers, made it as safe as humanly possible while still showing the aircraft's capability. The night before Sterling left for Paris, they met one final time. Morrison's apartment, sparse, half-furnished. The residence of a man who'd stopped investing in his own life. "You should see Emily before you go," Morrison said. "I plan to." Sterling accepted the beer Morrison offered, taking her and Sarah to dinner tomorrow. "Good." They drank in silence for a while, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down. Dave Sterling finally said, "When I get back from Paris, win or lose, I'm done. I'm retiring." Morrison looked up. Buying a ranch outside San Antonio. Sterling smiled, but his eyes were tired. Raising horses, growing old, remembering what peace feels like. "You should think about it too. Getting out, finding something else. This is all I know." "That's not true. You know how to be a father, a husband, a good man. You've just forgotten. Jennifer left me because you left first." Sterling stood, walked to the window, looked out at nothing. "Your dad died in the war. My dad came back. You know what he told me? He said the boys who didn't make it, they died so the rest of us could live. Not survive, live. Really live." He turned back to Morrison. "Mike's gone. Your marriage is broken. Your company's losing $1 billion. At some point, you have to ask if what you're fighting for is worth what you've already lost." Morrison had no answer. Sterling left. Morrison sat alone in his empty apartment, surrounded by technical drawings and photographs. Evidence of a life spent chasing something that was always one sail away, one demonstration away, one chance away. He fell asleep on the couch, dreamed of his father, dreamed of Mike Torres, dreamed of Jack Sterling flying perfect loops over French countryside while crowds cheered. In the dream, everyone lived. Everyone succeeded. In the dream, belief was enough. He woke to his phone ringing, early morning, California sun harsh through uncurtained windows. The voice on the other end was Sarah Blackwood, flat, emotionless. The voice of someone who'd stopped feeling because feeling was too much. David, Jack's gone. Paris, he went down during the demonstration. Morrison heard the words, understood them, rejected them. No, I'm sorry, no, it was safe. We made it safe. He knew the limits, I know. Blackwood's voice cracked slightly, but it happened anyway. GLOI, same as Mike. He's gone, David. Morrison dropped the phone, heard Blackwood's voice calling his name from the floor. Didn't pick it up. He walked to his wall, where he'd pinned the photo. Emily at age 7 standing beneath the F-5G mock-up, both hands on the fuselage, grinning up at the camera. Daddy's special plane. Morrison pulled the photo down, looked at his daughter's face, his wife's handwriting on the back. Christmas, 1977. When everything seemed possible. He folded the photo carefully, put it in his wallet next to the crayon drawing. Two pieces of evidence that once before everything went wrong, he'd believed in something pure. Then David Morrison, age 43, engineer and builder of beautiful machines, sat on the floor of his empty apartment and cried for his friend, for Mike Torres, for his father and grandfather, and every honest man who'd ever believed the world rewarded doing right. Cried until there were no tears left. And then, because there was nothing else to do, he stopped crying, stood up, got dressed, and went to work. Because Jack Sterling had died proving the F-20 was worth believing in. And David Morrison would be damned if he'd prove him wrong. The days after Paris moved like a funeral procession. Slow, heavy, inevitable. Morrison flew to France to identify Sterling's body, stood in a sterile morgue and looked at his friend's face through a viewing window. Peaceful, still, the kind of sleep that never ends. A French official handed him Sterling's personal effects. Flight suit, watch. The combat wings from Korea bent but intact. Morrison held the wings in his palm, felt their weight. His father's wings were in a box in Lubbock pinned to a flag that had draped a coffin. Now he held Sterling's father's wings recovered from another coffin. 3 generations, 3 wars, 3 men who believed in something. He put the wings in his pocket, signed the paperwork, left without speaking. The flight home was empty seats and silence. Morrison stared out the window at clouds over the Atlantic. 38,000 feet up the world looked clean, ordered. From this height you couldn't see the mess, the broken promises, the dead pilots, the families shattered by belief. From this height it almost looked like things made sense. But Morrison knew better now. The FAA investigation concluded 2 weeks later. The findings were identical to Torres. G-induced loss of consciousness. Pilot exceeded physiological limits during high G maneuver. Aircraft performed as designed. No mechanical failure. No design flaw. The recommendation was simple. Better pilot training. Lower demonstration G limits. Standard operating procedures updated. None of it would bring back Mike Torres. None of it would bring back Jack Sterling. Morrison sat in the hearing room and listened to the investigators present their findings. Listened to them explain how 2 men had died doing exactly what Morrison had designed the aircraft to do. Listened to them conclude that everything was fine. The plane was fine. The system was fine. Only the men were broken. The board meeting came in early June. Morrison knew what was coming before he walked into the room. You could feel it in the building, the way people avoided eye contact, the way conversations stopped when he passed. The company was bleeding money. The program had 0 orders. 2 crashes, international embarrassment. The math was simple, brutal, final. Thomas Aldridge didn't waste time on preamble. The board has voted to terminate the F-20 program, effective immediately. All remaining prototypes to be scrapped or donated. Development team to be reassigned or laid off. He looked at Morrison across the conference table. I'm sorry, David. Morrison nodded, said nothing. There was nothing to say. How much did we lose, he finally asked. $1.2 billion. The number hung in the air. 1.2 billion. 1,200 million. The GDP of a small nation. The cost of a carrier strike group. The price of believing that merit mattered. And what did we get for it? Aldridge's face was stone. 3 prototypes. 0 sales. 2 dead pilots. He paused. And proof that the system doesn't work the way we thought it did. Morrison stood, walked to the window, looked down at the factory floor. His team was down there. Henderson probably supervising something. Young engineers who'd believed in the dream. Technicians who'd built every rivet with care. What about the team? Half will be reassigned, half laid off. We'll do what we can. And me, Aldridge was quiet for a moment. You're still chief engineer. You still have a but David, you need to take time. Real time, get your head straight. Morrison turned back. My head's fine. Is it? Aldridge stood, walked around the desk. You've lost 20 pounds. You haven't seen your daughter in 3 weeks. Your wife is filing for divorce. 2 men are dead. When exactly did your head become fine? Morrison had no answer. Take a month, Aldridge said. Hell, take 3. Then we'll talk about what comes next. Morrison left the building that afternoon and didn't come back for 6 months. August 1986, California Science Center, Los Angeles. Morrison stood in the parking lot staring at the building. He'd been avoiding this for weeks. But Sarah Sterling had called. Said the museum was doing a dedication ceremony for the F-20. Said he should be there. Said Jack would have wanted it. Morrison didn't think Jack would have wanted anything except to be alive. But he went anyway. The aircraft sat in the main hall. F-20 prototype number 1. The bird that had made the first flight. The one that had proven everything Morrison believed about engineering excellence. Polished. Perfect. Dead. A small crowd gathered. Museum docents, aviation enthusiasts, a few veterans who'd heard about the ceremony. Sarah Sterling was there with her 2 kids. Teenagers now. The boy looked like Jack. Same jaw, same eyes, same ghost Morrison saw every time he looked in a mirror. The museum director gave a speech, talked about innovation, about the courage to push boundaries, about how the F-20 represented American engineering at its finest, about how some aircraft change history not by what they accomplish, but by what they prove is possible. Morrison listened and wanted to scream, wanted to stand up and tell them the truth, that the F-20 didn't prove anything except that the system was rigged, that good men died for nothing, that excellence meant nothing when politics made the rules. But he didn't. He just stood there, silent, listening to lies dressed up as inspiration. After the ceremony, people dispersed. Morrison walked up to the aircraft, ran his hand along the fuselage. The metal was cold, smooth, perfect welds, perfect rivets, every system built to spec, everything they'd promised. He thought about his father, about the jammed turret, about the letters complaining that nothing ever got fixed, about how James Morrison had flown anyway because that's what you did. You flew what they gave you and hoped it was enough. The F-20 was enough, more than enough. It just didn't matter. Mr. Morrison? He turned. Sarah Sterling's son stood there, 15 years old, awkward in a suit that didn't quite fit. Yes, the boy held out his hand. I'm Jack, Jr., named after my dad. Morrison shook the offered hand. Your father was a good man. Mom says you built this plane together. You and Dad. We did. Mom says it was the best fighter ever made. Morrison looked at the boy, at Jack Sterling's eyes in a younger face, at the future that should have been. Your father thought so. Was he right? Morrison considered the question. The honest answer, the true answer, the answer that mattered. Yeah, he was right. This aircraft could have saved lives, could have kept pilots safe, could have done everything we promised. He looked back at the Tigershark. But sometimes being right isn't enough. Then what is enough? Morrison smiled sadly. I'm still trying to figure that out. The boy nodded, seemed to understand something in the answer. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the bent combat wings from Korea. Mom wanted you to have these back. Said Dad would want you to keep them. Morrison took the wings, felt their weight again. No, he said quietly. These belong to you. Your legacy, your father's and your grandfather's. He pressed them back into the boy's hand. You keep them. Remember what they fought for. What did they fight for? Morrison looked at the F-20, at the museum around them, at all the beautiful machines built by honest men who believed. They fought because they thought it mattered, because they thought doing right was worth dying for. He met the boy's eyes. Don't ever let anyone tell you they were wrong. The boy left. Morrison stood alone with the aircraft. The hall was empty now, just him and the machine that had cost everything. He pulled out his wallet, extracted the 2 pieces of paper he'd carried for 8 years. Emily's Christmas photo, her crayon drawing, both worn at the edges from constant handling. He looked at his daughter's 7-year-old smile, at the innocence he'd sacrificed chasing a principal, at the family he'd destroyed trying to honor a father he'd never met. And for the first time in 8 years, David Morrison understood what his grandfather had been trying to tell him, what Henderson had warned him about, what Jennifer had begged him to see. You couldn't fight the system by being right. You couldn't change Washington by building better planes. You couldn't honor the dead by joining them. You honored the dead by living, really living. The way Jack Sterling's father had told him to, the way James Morrison had wanted his son to do, by being there for the people who needed you, by showing up, by choosing every single day to care about what actually mattered. Morrison put the photo and drawing back in his wallet, looked at the F-21 last time. You were perfect, he said softly. I'm sorry that wasn't enough. Then he turned and walked out of the museum, into the California sun, into whatever came next. 3 weeks later, Morrison's phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. David Morrison. The voice was familiar, accented, professional. Yes, this is Colonel Robert Chen from Taiwan. I don't know if you remember Robert. Morrison sat up. Of course I remember. How are you? I am well. Chen paused. I am calling because I wanted you to know something. Our Air Force completed a classified evaluation of the F-20 in 1983. Before the crashes, before everything. Morrison's heart began to beat faster. And the report was just declassified. I have a copy. Would you like to know what it says? Morrison closed his eyes. Yes, Chen read. Quote, the F-20 Tigershark represents the pinnacle of lightweight fighter design. In air combat maneuverability, trials against F-16, the Tigershark demonstrated superior turn rate, climb performance, and pilot visibility. In 12 of 18 evaluated criteria, F-20 exceeded F-16 performance. In weapons engagement scenarios, F-20 pilots achieved first shot advantage in 78% of encounters. He paused. The report recommends acquisition of 300 F-20 aircraft for Republic of China Air Force as primary air superiority platform. It concludes that the F-20 represents the optimal solution for Taiwan's defense requirements and should be acquired at earliest opportunity. Morrison couldn't speak. The words sat in his throat, choking him. David, you still there? I'm here. The report was submitted to my government in August 1983. Chen's voice was heavy. It was rejected for political reasons, not technical reasons. Political. I know, I wanted you to know that you were right, that Jack Sterling was right, that the aircraft was everything you said it was. Morrison felt something break loose inside him. Something that had been clenched tight for years, not relief, not vindication, just a kind of exhausted recognition. Thank you, Robert. That means more than you know. I am sorry, Chen said, for all of it. Yeah. Morrison looked out his apartment window at nothing in particular. Me too. They talked for a few more minutes, professional courtesies, promises to stay in touch that might actually be kept this time. When Morrison hung up, he sat for a long time staring at the phone. The F-20 was right. They'd been right. It just didn't matter. Except maybe it did. Just not in the way Morrison had thought. Not in sales or vindication or proving politicians wrong, but in knowing. In the men who'd flown it and said it was excellent. In the report that would sit in archives and tell future generations the truth. In the fact that for a brief moment, a group of honest men had built something perfect even if the world wasn't ready for it. That had to count for something. Morrison stood, walked to his desk, pulled out paper and pen, started writing. Dear Emily, the words came slowly at first, then faster. An apology, an explanation, a plea for a second chance. Everything he should have said years ago. Everything he'd been too proud or too broken or too obsessed to say. He told her about her grandfather, about the jammed turret and the letters and the promise Morrison had tried to keep. He told her about the F-20 and what it had cost. He told her he was sorry, that he'd chosen wrong, that he wanted to make it right if she'd let him. He told her he loved her, that he'd always loved her, that he'd just forgotten how to show it. He mailed the letter the next morning. Didn't know if she'd read it, didn't know if she'd respond, but he'd said what needed saying. The rest was up to her. 2 weeks passed, then his phone rang. Jennifer's number. "Hello? She wants to see you." Jennifer's voice was carefully neutral. "Saturday. The volleyball game at 2. Morrison felt his throat tighten. "I'll be there." "David." Jennifer paused. "Don't disappoint her again." "I won't." He showed up Saturday at 1:30, found a seat in the bleachers. The gym smelled like floor wax and teenage sweat and possibility. Emily came out with her team for warm-ups. 16 years old now, tall, athletic, his daughter. She saw him, stopped. Their eyes met across the gym. Morrison raised his hand in a small wave, uncertain, hoping. Emily stood there for a long moment. Then she smiled, just a little, just enough. Morrison felt something in his chest that might have been his heart remembering how to work. She played brilliantly. Every serve, every spike, every save, Morrison watched with the attention he should have given years ago. When the game ended, when her team won, he stood and cheered with the other parents. Felt for a brief moment like he belonged somewhere again. Emily came over after, still in her uniform, sweaty, beautiful, alive. "You came," she said. "I came." They stood there, father and daughter, a chasm of loss between them. "I got your letter," Emily said. And I'm still mad at you." Morrison nodded. "You should be, but..." She looked down, scuffed the floor with her shoe. "I want to try. If you want to try. I want to try." "Okay." She looked up. Meet her eyes to his. "But you have to actually be here. Not just show up. Be here." "I will be." Emily nodded, walked away to join her friends. But she looked back once, smiled again. Morrison drove home through Los Angeles traffic. The sun was setting over the Pacific. The city was beautiful and terrible and full of people living their lives, making choices, winning and losing, trying again. He thought about his father, about the letters and the promise and the 40 years spent trying to honor a man he had never known. Thought about how maybe the best way to honor the dead wasn't to die for the same cause. Maybe it was to live better than they'd been allowed to choose differently, to not make their mistakes. Maybe that was what legacy actually meant. Back in his apartment, Morrison looked at the technical drawings still taped to his walls. The F-20 in 100 different configurations. The dream that had cost everything. He began taking them down, one by one, carefully. They'd go in a box, in storage, not thrown away, just set aside. Proof that once he'd believed in something hard enough to sacrifice everything for it. But belief he understood now wasn't enough. Belief without wisdom was just obsession. Belief without love was just pride. Belief without balance was just a slower form of suicide. He'd been right about the F-20. It was an excellent aircraft, the best lightweight fighter of its generation. History would prove that. Engineers would study it. Pilots would wonder what if. But he'd been wrong about everything else. The work was finished by midnight. The walls were bare. The apartment looked empty, ready for something new. Morrison sat on his couch, pulled out his wallet one more time, looked at Emily's photo, at her 7-year-old smile beneath the F-5G mock-up. She was 16 now. He'd missed 9 years. Couldn't get them back. But he could show up for what came next. Could be there for 17, 18, 19. Could be the father she deserved instead of the ghost she'd gotten. Could honor his own father not by dying in the cockpit of belief, but by living for something that actually mattered. He put the photo back, looked around the empty apartment. Tomorrow he'd call Jennifer, ask about family counseling, ask about being more than just a weekend visitor, ask if there was any way to rebuild what he'd destroyed. Tomorrow he'd call the museum, ask about volunteering, teaching kids about the F-20, not as a tragedy but as a lesson. About how excellence matters even when it doesn't win. About how integrity counts even when it costs everything. about how you keep building, keep trying, keep believing, even when the system is rigged. Not because you'll change the system, but because being a person who tries is better than being a person who quits. Tomorrow he'd start over, again, for the last time, for real this time. But tonight, David Morrison just sat in his empty apartment and felt for the first time in 8 years like maybe he might be okay. Like maybe Jack Sterling's father had been right. The boys who didn't make it died so the rest of us could live, not survive. Live. Really live. Outside, Los Angeles glittered in the darkness. Millions of lights, millions of people, millions of stories of winning and losing and trying again. The city didn't care about the F-20, didn't care about billion-dollar dreams or dead pilots or broken engineers. The city just kept living. And maybe that was the lesson. Maybe that was what mattered. Morrison turned off the lights, went to bed. Tomorrow was Saturday. Another volleyball game. Another chance. He'd be there. Epilogue. Where are they now? David Morrison continued as an aerospace consultant for another 15 years. He never worked on fighter programs again. Instead, he focused on safety systems, ejection seats, crash-worthy fuel tanks, the unglamorous work of keeping pilots alive when things went wrong. He reconciled with Emily over years, not months, attended every game, every graduation, walked her down the aisle in 1994, held his granddaughter in 1998, and wept. He never remarried Jennifer. That door had closed. But they became friends, real friends. The kind who could sit together at family events and remember both the good and the bad without bitterness. He died in 2019 at age 77. Quietly, at home, Emily holding his hand. His last words were about an aircraft he'd designed 50 years earlier. But they weren't about failure. They were about what he'd learned, what mattered, what didn't. The F-20 Tigershark remained in the California Science Center. 3 prototypes were built. 0 were sold. $1.2 billion was lost. 2 pilots died. But the aircraft sat in that museum, beautiful and alone, a monument to American engineering that was right but not enough. Years later, when the military released classified reports, when historians analyzed the Cold War, when engineers studied lightweight fighter design, the F-20 was recognized for what it was, the best export fighter of its generation. Superior to F-16 in specific roles. Ahead of its time. Killed by politics, not performance. But that vindication came too late for the men who built it. Too late for the pilots who died proving it. Too late for the families shattered by belief. The lesson, if there was one, wasn't about aircraft. It was about what we choose to believe in, what we sacrifice for, what we let define us. David Morrison learned eventually that building perfect machines doesn't make you a perfect man. That being right about engineering doesn't make you right about life. That honor and integrity and excellence matter, but they matter most in how you treat the people who love you. He learned that the best way to honor the dead, it isn't to join them, it's to live the life they couldn't, to be there for your daughter, to show up for what matters, to choose everyday love over principle, presence over perfection. That's what made him, in the end, a good man. Not the aircraft he built, not the fights he won or lost, but the years he spent learning to be a father, a grandfather, a person who understood that being human means being wrong sometimes and having the courage to try again. The F-20 sits in that museum still. If you visit Los Angeles, you can see it. Read the plaque, learn about the specifications, marvel at what might have been. But what you won't see is David Morrison's real legacy. That's in Texas, in a woman who coaches high school volleyball, in her daughter who studies engineering, in a family that knows the cost of obsession and the value of presence. That's in 3 generations who learned that excellence matters, but love matters more. The F-20 was the last honest fighter, the last time American engineers could build something purely on merit and hope the world would notice. After it failed, the game changed. Everything became about politics. Everything became about money. But maybe that's not the real story. Maybe the real story is about a man who spent 8 years fighting a system and 30 years learning to live within it, who lost everything chasing perfection and found something better in the wreckage, who built the best fighter plane of his generation and discovered it was the worst thing he'd ever done to his family, who learned finally what his friend Jack Sterling had tried to tell him, that the boys who didn't make it died so we could live, not survive. Live. Really live. David Morrison lived. In the end, that's what mattered. Not the aircraft, not the vindication, not the $1 billion or the zero sales or the 2 crashes. Just a man learning to live, to love, to be there when it counted. If you're reading this, if you served in the military and knew men like Jack Sterling, or built things like the F-20, or sacrificed family for work that seemed important, understand this. You were right to believe, right to try, right to care, but belief isn't enough. Excellence isn't enough. Being right isn't enough. What matters is what you do next, who you show up for, who you choose to love with the time you have left. David Morrison figured that out. Eventually, after it cost him almost everything. Don't make his mistakes. Don't wait 8 years. Don't sacrifice your Emily for your F-20. The work will always be there. The mission will always matter. The cause will always be just. But your daughter's volleyball game is this Saturday at 2, and she's watching the door, waiting to see if you show up. Be there. That's the real legacy. That's what remains when everything else is gone. That's the only thing that ever really mattered. Fade to black.